Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today I'm honored to have Brother Subboor with me. Brother Subboor, mashallah, you just came out of a very, very entertaining, fascinating debate with Alex O'Connor. I watched it on IERA just a couple of days ago. I truly enjoyed it. How are you feeling, Akhi? How have you been?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. I'm more concerned about the coronavirus at the moment than anything else.
Naturally, naturally.
Naturally, I think it's taken away everybody from what they're focusing on
Yeah,
to, it's totally distracted me, and I'm sure it's totally distracted a lot of people.
definitely.
Um,
It's
and
not
even
as
people
bad.
watching this. Sorry?
It's not as bad in this side of the world, but yeah, and yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. We are having we're
Well,
not like the restaurants are closed. We can only get takeaway and whatnot. But I mean, yeah, it is bad, but it's not as bad as elsewhere.
yeah. I was more thinking of it from the perspective that, you know, um, nothing happens without Allah's permission. So this thing, wherever it is and whatever's going to happen, Allah has a plan.
Yeah,
So if you look at the fitna and the fasad that we've been spreading on earth in terms of hedonistic lifestyle, materialistic lifestyle, atheism, nudity, and these are all things which Sheikh Yasir Qadhi was talking about in his khutbah, which he just released on his channel, about the coronavirus and about um, Allah's punishment coming upon a people when um, evil spreads, right?
right.
When these types of evil spread. So yeah, that really shook me up because before that I was just sort of more focusing on coronavirus from a perspective of, oh, how is it going to impact us? You
Right,
know, those things are trivial, to be honest. Travel
right.
restrictions and that. But when he mentioned about the metaphysical aspect of it, right, that really shook me. I was like, whoa,
Right.
this is a sign. This is a lesson that we need to rectify our deeds.
Allah musta'an, ya akhi. Allah musta'an.
Yeah.
Well, akhi, I first of all would like to thank you for giving me some of your time. Because when I watched the debate, there were a lot of questions that came to mind, and but before even going into that, there are some general questions that I have that I just have to ask, and I'm sure a lot of the viewers are quite curious about these things as well. Well, firstly, what got you into this field? Why Darwinism? Why atheism in the first place?
That's a good question. So it goes back to sort of my childhood. Sounds kind of funny,
Have you
but
been asked this before?
um, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think I
But
have.
not recorded, right?
I'm trying to think where.
Let's say no. Let's say no and assume that this
Yeah,
is an
actually, no.
exclusive.
There's a brother from Australia who's got that podcast thing, Boys in the Cave. I think I spoke to him about it.
Let's
So
assume that
basically,
never happened. Please carry on. Please carry on.
okay. So basically, I was born in London, but I spent a good portion of my life in Oxford. And growing up there, my parents sent me to a very posh school called Cherwell School, in which I still remember when I left my other normal school in Oxford to go to this posh school. The RE teacher, religious education teacher, she asked the students in the class, like, who believes in God? And I put up my hand and I turned around and like nobody had their hand
Oh
up.
wow.
They were all a bunch of atheists. And so from a young age, I was sort of exposed to this type of atheism. So, a problem of evil and, other things people say. So I always had this sort of interaction with atheists. And then when I turned to the deen properly around around the time I was at university, that's when I recognized, okay, if this is true, and then I discovered it is true, then I just have to tell people about it. And obviously, living in the Western world, you're not going to be dealing with Christians. We're not talking about Sheikh Ahmed Didat's time 20,
Right.
30 years ago. Now they're atheistic, they're
Right.
agnostic, and
Right.
Christianity is just dying. So I was just
Are you
interacting with
speaking
him when,
specifically about the UK, or are you speaking about the West in general? Because I'm getting a lot of comments and a lot of feedback, usually negative feedback from a huge Christian audience. I assumed
right.
atheism was dead. I mean, I assumed Christianity was more or less, well, it is more or less going downhill. But please, yeah, do share your thoughts. Is it
Yeah,
like, is it a
yeah.
bigger thing in
So
England than elsewhere?
I, I would say you're right. It's more of a UK thing.
Hmm.
Christianity is very strong globally. I don't even
Interesting.
think it's dying globally. I think it's globally is very strong. I think in Western Europe it's dying.
Right.
Uh, North America is stronger than ever.
Right.
A lot of people don't recognize that this type of I mean, just look at the American government. Look at Mike Pence, who's the vice
Wow.
president. He is a hardcore Christian,
Mm.
right? So Christianity is very strong, especially in North America, and in the UK, these places, it's missionaries are far and few between. There's not there are some, but not a lot. But in South Korea sends out a
Oh
huge
wow.
number of missionaries. China has loads of Christians. China is going to be the largest Christian nation on earth
No
by
way.
2070,
No
right?
way.
Yes, yes. Look at the statistics. It doesn't mean it's the largest by percentage, but it's the largest by number.
Right.
The
Right.
largest number of Christians in the world are actually going to be in China by some statistic I read, 2070 or something. So Christianity is on the rise, and the work that you're doing is, if you like, you're looking at the entire picture. Atheism is still a minority issue. A lot of people don't recognize that. But especially if you go to Africa and Latin America, Christianity is the oxygen that you breathe. It's everywhere, and it's very, very strong.
Allah يبارك فيك يا أخي. To be honest, what attracted me to your videos in the first place, and guys, I'm a huge fan of Darwinian delusions, and subhanallah, it's one of the only channels that I constantly watch. May Allah bless you for that. I remember coming across one video of you in Speaker's Corner where you're just like, you're slightly above the crowd, and you're talking about Nazi Germany and them being technologically more advanced. Is that evidence for the correctness of a worldview? And I was like, wow, Ajib, this is I never heard of that before, and I really enjoyed your stuff ever since. Allah barik
Alhamdulillah.
fik.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So mainly it's something that you grew up around, and that's what caused you to pay attention to it more than anything else. And naturally, with atheism came Darwinism, right?
Yes. Although I would say that I was very much interested in biology even when I was at school.
Hmm.
And for me, one of the strongest arguments for God. Now, obviously, as a Muslim, the strongest reason for us to believe in God is the fitrah. It's not something, it's not just purely logic. But the
Right.
strongest argument to explain to a non Muslim for me was the design argument.
Right.
And the design argument, to a large extent, is dependent upon biological design.
Right.
So naturally, uh, dealing with atheists for roughly the last 10 years. Before that, I wasn't really dealing with them like on a full-time basis. It was more like ad hoc. But I recognized that Darwinism came up again and again and again and again. So I decided, okay, this is something I need to just start learning more about. And then Hamza Sotsis, as you know, he's a big believer in people, and he's a big believer in a specialization. So he really forced me to go down this route, to the point that he even was very supportive in me. Not supportive, actually. I'll put it in another way. Me and him were in Lebanon in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
and he was giving talks at the American University of Beirut and doing all the rest of the stuff. And then he literally forced me there and then in the hotel room to put together a presentation to deliver as part of one of the courses that he was doing.
MashaAllah.
And that was my first ever evolution talk, which he forced me
MashaAllah.
to do in Lebanon. And then he carried on, and he's a big believer in people, but he's also very pushy. He wants you to get better. He wants
Right.
you to improve. So he, alhamdulillah, has been very supportive. Alhamdulillah, I've done a master's now in philosophy with a massive focus on philosophy of evolution. and I'm going to be going on to do a PhD. And this is largely, almost entirely due to him, right? Obviously, it's Allah in the primary cause. In terms of the earthly means, Hamza was absolutely central to this. And I don't think if he wasn't around, I don't think I would have specialized. I think I would have just given some general talks on evolution and also spoken about other topics. But yeah, so he was a big influence.
May Allah bless you both, akhi. Allah barak fikum. Here's a question I've always had in mind. Because I don't really deal much with atheists unless I'm on the defense. And I saw you recently in the debate, and not only in the debate, but in general. But mashallah, it shined in the debate, going on the offensive, and that's something that. Muslims are always on defense. They're always on the defense. They always have to explain the verse. They always have to speak about a hadith, put it in context, speak about the verification and whatnot. And it's really rare. That's what I see it as. I see it as a rare thing when Muslims are on the offensive, especially with atheists. So, what would you suggest? How would one turn the tables around? How would one go on the offensive when discussing such matters with atheists?
Okay, so before I speak about that, I just want to make a distinction between militant atheists, right, who are part of the new atheist movement, who we debate with, who we sometimes come across in Speaker's Corner and whatnot. So they need this treatment of an offensive. And they need this treatment to be, frankly, put in their place.
Right.
Because these are people who, they mock Islam. Like, if you look at CosmicSkeptic, a lot of people, Muslims, in fact, after the debate was saying, you were harsh to him, you were this, you were that. They don't understand. This is somebody who, in his video, he took this clip of Niqabi sisters who were speaking about the Niqab, and he named it a note to women in bags. And he's mocking the Niqab. He's mocking the Prophet. You have to take your gloves off for these people. Right? You don't, like, if someone offended your, the honor of your family or your mother, right? You wouldn't just be like, well, that's an interesting academic perspective you have there. We don't have a problem with people academically saying the Prophet, peace be upon him, is not a true prophet. Right. We don't have a problem with somebody speaking about niqab in a way that, okay, we don't think this is conducive to society for X, Y. That's fine. We're fine with that academic criticism. But when you get these new militant atheists who want to bash religion and mock Islam, they need a different treatment. So an average atheist, I don't talk to them like that. Right. So if you watch my debate with Professor Jeremy Pritchard, it's very cordial, very friendly. Again, another atheist, James Fodor from Australia, he's an academic there. And again, very friendly, very cordial. And an average atheist that I meet in the street, not those speaker corner preachers, atheist apologists. An average atheist that I would speak in the same way I would speak to a Christian, or I'd even speak to a Muslim that's lost. Right. I'd be very soft. So when it comes to these people, how do we turn the tables? Okay, that was your question. How we turn the tables, Aki, is by understanding their worldview, right? Now, if a Christian comes up to me and tries to say to me, isn't it true in Islam that a man can marry more than one wife? A man can marry 4. What would your response be to that Christian if he tries to mock that idea?
I would say it's something that's permissible in the Old Testament, for example.
Excellent. There you go. So, Fareed, you could do that because you're an expert in Christianity. You could just
I'm not. Trust me, I'm not. Okay.
Dismantling Christian apologists. So you could just take out anything from your toolbox that you know about their worldview and throw it back in their face and say, "What on earth are you talking about?"
Right.
Okay. Now, I mean that in a nice way, right? Not
right.
Some Christians may be nice, but when you're talking to militant evangelicals, you'll probably have to be a bit harsh,
right?
Because they normally are harsh. So you know something about their worldview that you can just throw back at them.
Right.
So when atheists speak about morality, what we need to do is any moral issue they bring up, we simply go to their tool their tools that they have, and they say, what on earth are you talking about? What on earth are you talking about? Good and bad doesn't even exist in your worldview. And just show them, even if they try and give you an opinion that's sophisticated about human rights, like Cosmic tried to, just show them. But your opinion contradicts Sam Harris's, which is the most popular opinion. But this guy disagrees with you, and this guy disagrees with you. It's in the same way that when you're debating against a Christian about Islam, and the Christian says, well, which Islam is correct? Is it Hanfi, Shafi, Shia, Sunni, Zaidi, Ahmadi? Again, the Christian is just showing lots and lots of difference of opinion. And even if we can say, Sunni Orthodox Islam is like 90%. So all of these other groups, they're kind of like irrelevant. Okay. The atheists can't do that.
Right. All opinions are equally valid.
They're a lot more fractured. Yeah.
Okay. Here's a question about that, and this is something you went into, or you mentioned briefly in the debate. What is Sam Harris's view, and how is that different from Alex's view?
Okay, good. So I want to explain why I kept bringing that up. Sam Harris is one of the four horsemen. His view is that morality is objective and atheism can justify objective morality, and it's enforceable.
Okay.
Now, his view he puts out in his book, The Moral Landscape. And that view is that the ultimate good is a society in which you have human flourishment, right? Humans are flourishing. Now, for that good, we actually need to take action A, B, C, and these actions for that goal are going to be objectively true. We know if action A is going to objectively lead to the flourishment of human beings. We know if action B will objectively not lead to that. So, freedom of speech, will it lead to human flourishment? Yes, it will, because people will be happy. What about, torture? Well, that's not going to work. So that's how he builds up his view. And he builds up his view trying to ground morality within science. So to give morality a scientific foundation. Now, his view is ridiculed by philosophers, right? And it's not accepted in academia. However, amongst the atheists, he is the go-to man, right? He is the go-to man. Very similar to, for example, if I wanted to find something on liberalism, I'd go to Muhammad Hijab, right? So with morality, atheists, new atheists especially, they keep referring to Sam Harris. Now, the thing about CosmicSkeptic, which we have to respect, and this is why I did mention it in the debate, even though I disagree with him a lot of things, I did give him kudos for this, right? He explains why that view is wrong. And it's not just that he's worked out a novel way of criticizing it. Academically, we know it's bogus. His view is bogus, right? So Alex is basically...
Would you mind explaining why it's bogus?
Well, Alex has the same criticism that others have, which is, why is the idea of human flourishment objectively good? Like, why did you just give yourself that free assumption?
Right. So
you see,
and Alex just basically switched it out with pleasure?
Yes. So what he's done is, he's said, our view is we all subjectively, number one, we all subjectively desire the maximization of our pleasure and the minimization of our pain, right? Okay. And he says this is necessarily true, that all human beings cannot avoid this. Now, even if we grant that assumption, which I don't grant, but even if we grant that assumption, the second question is, well, why should we be good? Why should we do actions which are good?
Right.
Well, if you, and Alex gives the example of painting the town blue, right? If everybody subjectively agrees to, I like the color blue, then when the question comes, what shall we color the town, which affects everybody, then the obvious answer is, we should color it blue. Now, if somebody comes along and says, no, I want to color it yellow, then that person is objectively wrong, because Alex can show your deep down desire is to want it to be blue. But here you are saying you want it to be yellow. Now, how is this related to morality? Well, it's related in the following way. Each one of us, subjectively, we want the maximization of our pleasure and the minimization of our suffering. So, in society in large, we should also want the maximization of pleasure and the minimization of suffering. So, with the color blue, even though subjectively everybody believes it to be true, that's not true, but they believe it's an objective fact, even though everybody subjectively believes that that blue is their favorite color. So it becomes an objective fact that everybody, to maximize their pleasure, right, they should take certain actions. So his view works in the following way. Let me just contrast it to Sam Harris's view. Sam Harris's view is this: human flourishing is the ultimate goal. We need to take action A, B, C for human flourishing. Now, if you, Fareed, you turn around and you say, I don't really care about following morals, Sam Harris can come down at you with his view with an iron rod. He can say, I don't really care what your opinion is. These are objective truths, and you have to follow them whether you like them or not. Because his view of morality is objective. His view of human rights is objective. And objective means, just like 1 + 1 is 2, if you think 1 + 1 is 7, Sam Harris can just smack you across the head and say, don't care what you think, right? Yeah. Take this. 1 + 1 is 2, because it's objectively true. Now, how does Alex's system work? Because if somebody says, okay, I want pleasure for myself, but I don't mind going out and raping somebody, right, then Alex would say, he'd go up to the rapist and say, you're being philosophically inconsistent, because you want the maximization of your own pleasure, right? And why wouldn't you want the maximization of other people's pleasure? So you internally are being inconsistent. Basically, I'm simplifying his view, but that's his view. So his entire view is based upon, firstly, the idea that everybody wants to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Even if we grant that, the second step is, how his view is supposed to be enforced is by going up to people and telling them, what you're doing, you're being inconsistent. You're being inconsistent. Right. But like I raised in the debate, and he didn't have an answer for this, he was just waffling about it, is I said, your view is not enforceable because you're assuming people value consistency.
Why do you think they should value the idea of consistency or truth or rationality like you do?
Well, I'm not saying that they should. I'm saying that they do value suffering and pleasure in the same way that I do.
Yeah, but they don't agree with your argument.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't make it any less true, right?
How do you?
It doesn't matter if they agree.
My question is, how do you enforce it?
My argument is that they care about their suffering, and doing this will minimize their suffering. It doesn't matter if they agree with me on that. I'm either right or wrong about it. Like whether or not they agree with me, whether or not I can convince them of it, has absolutely no bearing on whether it's actually true.
No, but what I'm saying is, this is why Sam Harris's view is better, because it's enforceable, it's objective. When your view is impotent, because you couldn't actually do anything in that situation.
Sure, but we'll close it here. But look, this is a point about not whether my view is right or wrong, but whether or not I'm capable of enforcing it. I don't care if I'm capable of enforcing it.
But if you can't enforce human rights,
I'm trying to make the case,
it's impotent.
Ladies and gentlemen, that human rights are consistent. It is consistent for me to be an atheist and believe in human rights. Whether or not I can enforce them on a desert island, whether or not that would apply in another evolutionary trajectory that we don't currently live in, irrelevant to the point of whether the argument I'm making now in this evolutionary trajectory is true. Right? If the argument is true, then whether or not I can enforce it holds no bearing on that. And the question we're being asked to consider is whether or not it is true that it is consistent. And I hope that you can see that at the very least, even if you disagree with me, that it's consistent. For instance, I would think that a Muslim might be able to accept that a Christian could justify human rights. They might say that Christianity has an ability to justify human rights, even though they think it's wrong, right? Because it's consistent at the very least. And I just asked the same thing of myself.
Do you want to make a concluding remark?
Well, this is why, and I think this is very important to understand, there's a reason why Sam Harris has actually put his argument in the way that he actually has. Because if human rights are to be taken the way Alex has actually explained, they're impotent. You couldn't actually enforce them. You couldn't actually impose them. You'd simply have to reason with people, and you're going to assume that they value the things that they do and they understand your particular worldview, and they don't need to. And if that's the case, then human rights are just written on paper, and they don't actually make a real change in the world.
And because, and I'm assuming the difference is, he admits that it's subjective and therefore it can't be enforced?
Yes.
Okay.
Because, one of the things that he was playing around a lot in the debate with, and some people were saying, "Oh, you're interrupting him. You're not even finished." He was trying to just cover up the idea that his view was subjective.
Right.
He kept going back to, well, yes, there's a subjective base, but overall it's objective. Yes, we may all subjectively like the color blue, but if we all like the color blue, then it's an object fact that everybody on earth likes the color blue. So he kept mixing. And I just wanted to repeat again and again. And one of the criticisms that the atheists had, because I was going through Alex's channel, is firstly, they were saying, I don't understand his argument, when that's not possible, because if I didn't understand his argument, why was he trying to respond to my contention? My contention was, you're being inconsistent. My contention was, you're assuming other people value consistency.
Right.
And then Alex had to respond to that. So
Right.
if I didn't understand his argument, how could I come up with a contention? But I find this, Aaron Ra did this same tactic to save face amongst his followers in the debate I had with him. He kept saying, well, you don't understand. Well, you don't understand.
Right.
Well, you don't
Right.
understand. And he's doing the same thing, essentially, right?
Right.
And one thing I wanted to do as a shortcut, because most people, they get lost in a technical jargon.
Right.
One thing I wanted to do as a shortcut is, after the long discussion, I just, right near the end, as you probably remember, I brought up the question of rape being objectively wrong.
Yes. Yes.
So I wanted to show, after all of his sophisticated nonsense, essentially, you can see his view is this. It's not objectively true. It's still based on assumptions and values and subjectivity.
I'm just going to ask a simple question, just to wrap it up. Is rape wrong objectively, past, present, future, yes or no?
Yes.
You shouldn't hesitate here.
It's an object. Why not?
Because
I'm sorry. So I should. So the base idea of ethics, right? The base idea of doing ethics is that we reevaluate why we believe certain things and see if they're accurate, right? If there is a proposition that you believe to be totally true, as I thought, for instance, of something like not being a racist, right? If somebody asks me, why are you not a racist? And I immediately say, or are you not a racist? And I immediately say, yes, of course I'm not a racist, right? Whereas it pays sometimes, even if it seems ethically obvious, to sit back and think, well, why do I think that? Am I sure about that? And the answer can lead you to other moral places.
Sure, what's the answer?
So the answer is this, right? It is objectively true that to allow people to rape morally would not be an achievement of the goal that we all share.
That's not the question I asked.
That's the objectivity in it.
Yeah, but you're answering a question.
What you want me to do...
Wait 1 second. You're answering a question I didn't ask. I asked a very clear question, which everybody, I think, understood here, right? I asked, is rape wrong? Is that objectively true? And you're just beating around the bush.
But the reason why I have to beat around the bush is because I have to clarify that, remember how I said that a base principle can be subjective, but you can have objective derivatives from it?
Right.
So in terms of the objective derivative from our nature, yes, it is objectively wrong. Yes, is the answer to your question.
Based upon the subjective...
But you're going to want to turn around then and say, but it's based upon a subjective principle.
Yes.
Yes, it is, right?
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that I can say rape is not objectively wrong. I say that if we agree on this subjective moral principle, which we do, then we can make the objective derivative that rape is wrong.
Would a rapist agree to that? Of course they wouldn't.
No, they wouldn't. But again, whether or not someone agrees with me is irrelevant to whether it's correct
But
or not.
look, Alex,
this is another jump you keep making.
Alex, what you're doing is you're building a house on a sandcastle, yeah? You are trying to say, look, if you ask me the question, I would say rape is wrong. Yes, it's wrong objectively.
Yeah.
But in your case, what you're doing is you're saying, right, subjectively, some people may hold this opinion. According to that, then since they all subjectively...
No, all people do hold that opinion. Okay, and from that we objectively derive that rape is wrong.
A rapist doesn't of course, doesn't hold that opinion.
No, a rapist does value their pleasure and the avoidance of
Yeah,
their suffering.
they value their pleasure,
Yeah,
right?
do, right?
So it's not wrong for them.
Yeah, right, okay.
Because they're maximizing their pleasure.
No, but look, again, this is the mistake we're making. I said, I remember...
No, we're
earlier,
making, you're
I
making
said,
because...
This is the man going into town and saying, let's paint the town yellow. This is what the rapist is doing, right? Just because they're saying, it's all subjective. I want this to be yellow. I don't want it to be blue. It's like,
but
you are being
Alex,
inconsistent.
you are assuming...
This doesn't work. You are wrong, right? You are incorrect. Even if it's based on a subjective-based principle, it is objectively wrong
Alex,
as a derivative to be saying
Your entire
this.
argument is based upon the assumption that everybody likes the color blue. That's not true. And look,
no, of course that's not true. But by analogy,
me liking the color, chocolate or vanilla, is as arbitrary for Alex as someone committing rape or not committing rape.
But it's not as necessarily true.
But it's not as necessary.
Yeah, it's not as necessary.
Do you see? So for him, it's just as subjective. Whether you like chocolate, vanilla, or something else, it's just as subjective when it comes to rape, murder, pillaging, all of these things. And behind all the sophisticated technical jargon and sophistry,
I'll take that as a compliment.
Essentially, what it boils down to is the same thing which Richard Dawkins admitted to. The idea that rape is wrong is as arbitrary as the fact that we have 5 fingers rather than 6.
Okay, all right. And what I found really interesting in the debate was how there was this general response that you gave him, which was you're assuming human. What was it? Human. It's here somewhere in my notes. Human exceptionalism, I believe.
No, that wasn't at that part. That was at another part.
It was in your intro, towards the end of your intro, I believe.
Yeah. So that part, basically, I'll summarize my argument, right? And this is the thing about Alex. In his debate with Andalusi and hijab, if you remember, he said to Andalusi, he said to him, well, why don't you put your argument into a formal form that I can assess it, right? And then when he had to make a case for atheism justifying human rights, he didn't put his argument together in a formal thing. I put my argument in a formal way because obviously I wanted clarity.
Right.
I wanted to make sure the crowd understood, the people watching online understood, and Alex understood what my argument was, and that we could deal with each point. So with my argument, my first premise was atheism leads to moral nihilism, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second premise was moral nihilism undermines human rights. And the third conclusion was, therefore, atheism undermines human rights.
Yes.
Two things need to be in place for my argument to be solid. The first is that the premises have to be true. So the premise 1 has to be true, premise 2 has to be true. And the second thing is that the premises have to lead to the conclusion, right? So I left it open. I exposed myself. I said, here you go. Here's my argument. Take it on, right? So we can go in order on how he tried to tackle premise 1, how he tried to tackle premise 2, which includes human exceptionalism, and then how he basically tried to wriggle out of those things to try and get away from the conclusion. It failed, but I want to go over that in a chronological order, how that worked out.
All right, let's do that.
My first premise is atheism leads to moral nihilism. The thing about this premise is so obvious to anybody who understands philosophy, understands atheism in general, and this is incredibly difficult to get out of. And I mentioned an argument that was given by Alex Rosenberg for the idea that atheism leads to moral nihilism, but you don't even need Alex Rosenberg, who's a prominent atheist philosopher, for this. This is well known. This is well known from the time of Nietzsche, in fact, that if there is no God, morality is purely subjective in the same way that you like chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream. It's purely subjective. There's no objective base for it.
I will admit that while watching his introduction, I was expecting something, but when he was done, I was surprised that
it was an anticlimax.
Say again?
It was an anticlimax.
Yeah, there was nothing there. I was assuming there's going to be this great atheist argument for why there is some sort of objectivity there, but yeah, there was nothing. I was honestly, I was surprised that he would accept a debate on that subject when he didn't really have much to go for.
Yeah, but you do have to understand, Fareed, that he is somebody who's on home turf. So he regularly debates at Oxford. Most of the crowd was his. And, he's eloquent. And
Yes.
these matter a lot. And he's got a posh accent, right? These things matter a lot.
We need to work on that. Hamza
we-
needs to take some courses.
Well, I'm a big believer that if you just be yourself, right, people will see that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not too big. Like, people tell me to trim my beard. People tell me this and that. And I'm like, who cares? In fact, it's just like, at the end of the day, superficial people care about these things.
Right.
People that are really after the truth, they don't really care.
Right.
They don't really care about this stuff. But anyway, so the first premise is obvious. Now, what I did is I gave the argument of Alex Rosenberg. Now, I want you to recognize what a mistake Alex made. And after the debate, I did some post-debate analyses in which I highlighted some of these points. So my first premise was based upon Alex Rosenberg's argument. Alex Rosenberg puts together an argument for moral nihilism. Moral nihilism means morality is not right, not true nor false. Morality is just like it doesn't have any truth value. Okay.
Right.
So he makes the argument in his book, An Atheist Guide to Reality. Atheism necessarily leads to moral nihilism. Now, why I wanted to use his argument is, number one, he's one of the best philosophers of biology in the world, a really well-respected academic, and you're going to find his stuff all over the internet, and you're going to find him referenced in journals. So if Alex, and I wanted to do this psychologically, if Alex was going to challenge the first premise, he not only was going to challenge the general consensus that a lot of atheists have, that morality is atheist philosophers have, that morality is not true, literally. He is also going to be challenging a tangible idea of one of the best known philosophers of biology in the world. And that's just going to make him look like an idiot, to be honest, right? to take on the idea directly. Right. Now, what really shocked me is I gave a paradox which Alex Rosenberg gives. And the paradox is in the following way. Let me know if you follow, and I'll repeat it if not. Right. It's a little bit subtle. So Alex Rosenberg says we have core morality. Core morality is basic ideas all over the world. Take care of the elderly. You have the right to what you earn. Don't hurt a child. Don't hurt a woman. Stuff like this, right? And he says, okay, core morality we have in the world. So he gives you a paradox. He says, is this core morality, is it the fact that it is true? Is it the fact that it is true, therefore natural selection selected it? Okay? Because there's no other explanation except a Darwinian explanation of morality. Atheists have no other explanation. They don't believe in God. So he said, is it the fact that this set of core morals are true, therefore natural selection, this blind process, selected it?
Yeah.
Or is it the case that this core morality was selected, therefore it's true? Meaning, is it just the case that it evolved, therefore it's true? So he gives you a paradox.
Right.
So let me make the paradox. Either core morality is true, therefore it was selected, or core morality is selected, therefore it's true.
Right.
And he says it can't be either option. Both of these are ridiculous, right? They're absurd. And he goes over a long argument, even though, remember, philosophers, even though something seems absurd, they'll tell you why and they'll go over it.
Right.
And he says there's no answer to this paradox except moral nihilism. That core morality is not true or false. It's just something arbitrary, essentially, right?
I don't recall CosmicSkeptic giving an answer to that one.
He actually did.
Is core morality true, therefore it was selected? Or is it the case that it was selected, therefore it's true? And of course, both of these are absurd. So therefore he concludes that moral nihilism is the only conclusion for an atheist to hold, and therefore atheism undermines human rights. Which one of these do you disagree with?
I disagree with the atheism leading to moral nihilism. You kind of co-opted Plato's Euthyphro dilemma.
I didn't. I used Alex
you used somebody else doing it. To say, so of course the traditional Euthyphro dilemma being
for God.
An argument against morality and God. Are things good because God commands them, or does God command them because they're good? And if I understand the version that you're using, is this moral statement true because it's selected for, or is it selected for because it's true?
Yep.
Now, of course, myself, I can't believe that it's selected for because it's true, right? Like we'd agree that would be nonsensical in my worldview. But we have to be careful here. I can say something like it is true because it's selected for. Now, what I mean by this is when I talked about the expanding circle of Peter Singer, I explained why it is that we have certain moral propositions, why it is that we have certain moral desires. I then separately justify why we act in accordance with those desires. So I can say that something would be selected for, right? Or something can be true because it's selected for, like an experience of pleasure, like the ability to experience pleasure and pain. That's something that's selected for. And it becomes true because it's been selected for that suffering is an experience. Suffering is something that exists. So from that we can then reason morally.
So what you said there, I'm just going to use that and change the variables again. Okay. If we evolved under different environmental conditions and they were selected for, and I didn't have time to go into deeply into why Alex Rosenberg denied the second that it was selected for, therefore it's true. In that case, then killing the elderly would be selected for, and that would be, according to you, a good thing.
It's interesting. It's like you bring up the point put to Richard Dawkins. I think you're quoting my friend Justin Brierley there, who put that question to him, and I put it to him myself, and he has this kind of, well, I guess, I don't know, I think it's, and goes off on some nothing about
he waffles,
about pleasure and pain. But here's the thing, I don't think that the thing that has been selected for, that is an ability to experience pleasure and pain, I don't think that can be different, right?
Okay, so that's where I disagree with you again.
And I was literally shocked when he did that, because that's just ridiculous. I mean, if I tell somebody this is a paradox, and then they take it on head on, and they choose one of the two bad options, you would expect a layman to do that. You wouldn't expect someone studying philosophy to do that, because by the very label, paradox, if a philosopher of biology puts together a paradox, it means you shouldn't go for any of the options.
Right.
Alex did. And then I showed him why it's wrong based upon what Alex Rosenberg said. But still, I was in shock. And then when I made the post-debate analysis, I actually read out, the book's on my shelf, but I actually read out the entire section on why Alex Rosenberg said that option which Alex took, the second option, is nonsensical. So that's my first premise. And that one Alex had no real answer to.
Okay.
Yeah. Second premise?
Please.
Okay, so the second premise was that atheism leads to moral nihilism is the first premise. Second premise was moral nihilism undermines human rights. Okay?
Right.
Now, the premise is so simple.
Right.
Basically this. If morality isn't true, it's not right or correct, then human rights basically don't exist.
Right. It is too simple.
It's almost tautological, right? It's almost tautological. And I gave the simple example about human exceptionalism as an additional point. That wasn't even the core part of the second premise, right? So my main argument for the second premise was almost like trivial. It was just like, well, if morality doesn't exist, then why would we think human rights is a thing?
Right.
Khalas. But anyway, I wanted to put in human exceptionalism and give Alex a bit of a jab, because he's a big vegan.
Yeah.
So I put in an additional reason which I didn't really need to for the second premise, but I chucked it in anyway, which is this. Human rights. Why are we talking about the idea of human rights?
Yes.
Well, human rights is based on this idea that humans are exceptional. Human beings have a value, a worth. The biblical understanding is that human beings were created in the image of God.
Right.
Human beings have souls. Human
Right.
beings are the peak of creation. Therefore, humans have these rights.
Right.
So I gave an example. I said, if I clean this table,
Bacteria rights.
bacteria, if I kill bacteria, you're not going to say I'm a murderer. If coronavirus kills me, we wouldn't say it's a murderer.
Right.
Or if a lion attacks a deer, it's not going to be a murderer, is it?
Right.
And basically, me and Alex, we went forth on that.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, he came up with some really funny answers, right? So he was trapped. He was trapped because he's a vegan. Being a vegan, you basically have to argue against human exceptionalism. But for the second premise, to argue for human rights, you have to argue for a type of human exceptionalism. So if you want to make the case for human exceptionalism, if you want to make the case for human rights, you have to argue for human exceptionalism. If you want to argue for veganism, you have to argue against human exceptionalism. So there's an internal contradiction.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't notice that, to be honest.
Which is why he was at that point quite. He's contradicting himself, right?
Okay.
So, for example, I asked him about the deer. Is the deer worth more than a human?
Right.
Yeah. So would you, for example, consider a human being who killed a deer, would you say that human being should be killed?
Killed? No.
No, why?
Well, I don't think that a human being that kills another human being should be killed.
Okay, so would you...
Don't think capital punishment is a good idea.
What would be the punishment for killing a deer?
Oh, I don't know what the punishment would be. But I see what you're trying to say.
I'm trying to get consistency.
You're asking if I care about the deer less than the human?
Yes.
Yes.
Why?
Because I think that there are some morally relevant...
No, but look, Alex, you're making a few quick statements which I completely disagree with. For example, theory of mind.
Yeah.
Right? Crows have theory of mind. Why would you think a deer doesn't have a theory of mind?
When I say predict, I mean in terms of so for instance, let me give you a more trivial example. Humans can be anxious about their tax returns, whereas a deer cannot, right? It's a trivial example, but it's true. There are certain things that are true of some animals, but not of other animals, which afford them certain pains and sufferings, which might be more numerous or more intense than other animals. But they all matter in the same way, right? So there are some morally relevant differences between a human being and a deer, right, which allow me to say that a deer is worth less than a human being.
Because of its capacity for pain?
Because of those things which are related to its capacity for pain, yes. If it's got less of a capacity for pain...
So according to that logic, again I'm going to change the variables here, according to that logic, if there was a animal which had a great capacity for pain, right, say a super sensitive panda that we discovered in China, then the moral variables would change and that would perhaps maybe work to humans.
Yes.
He's in between a rock and a hard place. If he argues against human exceptionalism, he's undermining human rights. If he argues for human exceptionalism, he's arguing against veganism. So he tried to play a balancing act. Right? Which didn't really work out. And there's one really embarrassing part as well, which I didn't mention. That obviously I've covered my first premise and my second premise, and then therefore same conclusion, which by the way, I repeated. And I don't know if you noticed, but I repeated it in my opening, I repeated it in my discussion, and I repeated it in my ending, that no philosopher of biology believes ethics is anything but illusory. No one believes it's objective. Right? Because moral nihilism is the go-to standard, because ethics can't be objective. So I tried to it's true, but I tried to paint the picture that it's Alex against almost the entire philosophy of biology community who are atheistic. And I hope I made that clear, that throughout the debate I was saying, look, everything he's saying, it's not even peer reviewed, it's not even published, it's just something he's come up with, which is good. You know, you're trying to come up with your own argument, but it's really hard when someone's like myself is showing you're just one person on your own and you're up against all these giants.
Right.
Who are you?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That was one of my psychological tricks that I wanted to make sure that, because I know most people aren't going to understand the content. I know Alex wanted to get bogged down in semantical debates and technical jargon, which I felt he was doing a little bit, so I kept bringing it back, right? I wanted people to just see the bigger picture and see, look, even if whatever he's saying, even if it just sounds nice, at the end of the day, he's on his own, right? Nobody else agrees with him here, philosophically. But there's one other thing I wanted to highlight about the debate, which is I used his...
Okay, please bring the camera down a bit.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
Yeah,
it's good.
So I used his argument and I simply changed the variables.
Right.
Now, what I said is, well, if you want to maximize pleasure, firstly, we can just believe in God to maximize pleasure, because belief in God leads to these adaptive benefits, these pleasure benefits. And natural selection doesn't care about truth. It doesn't matter whether you believe in something true or false, as long as you're pleasurable. As long as you survive.
Could the same be said in regards to Sam Harris's theories in regards to this?
What do you mean?
Because instead of pleasure...
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes. So even within Sam Harris's view, we can make a critique that human flourishment is
believing God leads to human flourishment, and therefore,
false beliefs are fine. You know, if you have a false belief that at the end of the day, you have belief in karma, something bad happens to you, makes you feel better, that there's this invisible force, whatever, right? You can use that. So firstly, and the thing about Cosmic is that Alex really needs to work on his debating skills, because one of the things you don't do in a debate is you don't give an answer and then try and be firm on the answer and then change your mind in the discussion. Because if you're going to do anything, then you're going to give an answer, realize you messed up, try and just change the topic or whatever, right? And obviously, we as Muslims, we should just always give the answer that we believe is right and stick to it, and everything will work out. However, when it came to this particular argument, he first tried to use this very wishy-washy idea that it's a category error between God and belief in human rights to maximize pleasure, right? He first tried to say it's a category error. And I said, why? Well, why can't I do that? And then I also made this as a separate video, which you can put in as in the link, because I've made 4 videos which are post-debate. I think that's enough.
I'll stick them all in, inshallah.
Yeah. So, and then he tried to fight it off, and he said, no, the belief in God is something metaphysical, and human rights is like a concept. So I kept pushing him until in the end he said, I said, what's wrong with doing that? He said, nothing, right? And I said, there you go. So again, bad debating skills. You don't give an answer and then fight it like it's really a fight against the opponent, and then you just give in.
So for the sake of a better society, we can believe in these morals. Right?
But that's not that there's not a case of pretending as though they exist even.
Fine. For you,
yeah.
Right? But what's wrong with us just doing that with God, just to maximize pleasure?
Nothing.
That's the point.
I have a question in regards to this. I do not see why, and please do explain this to me. Objectively speaking, do humans have value, regardless of this whole matter of sensitivity and whatnot? Objectively speaking, wouldn't under I don't know, atheistic philosophy, I guess, do humans have value?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so
this is
the whole
thing I highlighted in the debate, right? Humans have no more value than bacteria.
Okay.
Right? Absolutely, this is clear if you look at the works of atheist philosophers, even the atheistic worldview.
Would you mind mentioning a few names, please?
Well, this goes back to even Nietzsche.
Okay.
You know, goes back to the whole idea of life being meaningless, moral nihilism, essentially.
Right.
Everything is pointless. Everything is meaningless.
Right.
You know, human beings being special. If you look at people like Alex Rosenberg, even, right? Is there a purpose to life? No. Is there soul? No. You know, why are we here? Just dumb luck. This is what he says in his book.
Right.
And it's a natural follow. It's a natural flow. It's a natural flow from the idea that atheism is true, that nihilism is true. Nihilism is life is meaningless. Everything is pointless. And if everything is meaningless and pointless, human life is pointless. It's meaningless. Human life, and this is also interesting from a Darwinian perspective, human life is no more valuable than the life of bacteria.
Right. Right.
In fact, bacteria are better than humans at surviving and reproducing.
Right.
Bacteria, they have asexual reproduction. They just reproduce. But human beings, we have to, you know, you have to give the woman, you know, a ring and all of that nonsense, right? But human beings are very ineffective at reproduction compared to bacteria.
There's a common there's a common theme in cinema, anime, video games, where you have the heroes trying to save the world, and the planet itself is trying to get rid of them, or a greater evil trying to get rid of the humans, and they're like, "What are you doing? You're killing us." And whatever the evil, the villain or the planet itself is like, "No, you humans are causing the suffering. You humans are causing the death of this world that we're in." And that thought just it stuck with me while I was watching this, and I was like, "But what makes humans so special?" And from their point of view, naturally.
And there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. Which is why Alex was in a really weird position of arguing against he has to argue against human exceptionalism.
Right.
But at the same time, if he argues against human exceptionalism, he undermines human rights. Because human rights, no human rights activist in the world would say human life is equivalent to the life of bacteria or, I don't know, a hyena, right? Or a wild pig or something. Right. No one would do that.
Right.
So, but he has to do that because, firstly, being a vegan and also being an atheist, human exceptionalism doesn't make any sense. I did mention, I mean, there's parts of the debate, I mentioned some things in my opening which Alex never touched upon. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned, you know, the soul, human beings having worth. He didn't mention, he didn't rebut that. I also said, why have you chosen pleasure? Because from an evolutionary perspective, pleasure is just a mechanism to help us survive and reproduce. The real goal is survival and reproduction. Likewise, we can survive and reproduce on anxiety. In fact, according to Darwinian academics, pleasure and anxiety, they both are mechanisms to help you survive. And if we were too much into contentment, and anxiety is actually a way of surviving. So I said, why don't you just maximize anxiety? Right. Why pleasure? Why have you just chosen pleasure? Right. And he didn't answer these types of things.
Right.
What I thought he was doing throughout the debate is he was trying to bog me down in his view about subjective and objective and derivatives, and he's trying to really, you know, when you try and have an argument with a Christian, and you know you want to talk about the big ideas, right? You want to talk about big ideas about, you know, what is the origin of the Bible, right? And they just want to talk about Luke this and that and that and this, and Mark said this in the beginning of there was the word. Do you see? Right. So that's what I felt he was trying to do. Okay. This is trying to buy time. I don't know if you noticed, but I felt like he wanted the discussion to end.
So it's a disanalogy. But
but how would you save those children?
I'm scared we're taking up time. I don't know how long we had left, and I want to make sure that we have
I think we should open it
Q&A.
up to questions now.
I have two questions, though, in regards to some things that were said in the debate that I feel need some more clarification. Utilitarian philosophy, excuse me. Is that what Alex ascribes to?
Yes.
Okay. And so please do explain that. Please do explain that, because he mentioned it very briefly and he didn't go into it, and he said he didn't want to go in. I think he said he didn't want to go into it, but him just mentioning it and then he just left it off there. I felt that it needed some more.
Okay, so let me just broadly mention, in ethics, there's three particular views.
Okay.
There's utilitarianism, which is what Alex subscribes to.
Okay.
There's Kantian ethics, and there's virtue ethics.
Okay.
These are the three well-known ones. Now, these three ethical systems, they're distinct. Mm-hmm. And I did mention in my opening that these three, because obviously you can be a believer in God and believe in utilitarianism, Kantianism, or virtue ethics, but being an atheist, any of these ethical systems are illusory, because morality is an adaptation. So in my opening, I mentioned Michael Ruse, who's a Darwinian academic.
Please bring the camera a bit lower, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. Sorry. I just went to go get some water.
All right, it's fine.
So I mentioned, look, it doesn't matter what your system is, it's illusory. And I gave, reasons for that. Mm-hmm. So Alex's view is utilitarianism, and utilitarianism, utility, is about the overall consequences of your actions. Mm-hmm. Okay? As an example, maximization of pleasure, right? That's a goal. That's a utility. That's what you want to achieve. To achieve that, what things can you actually do to achieve that? That's there. Now, Kantian ethics, why is that different? Kantian ethics are not about your overall goal or pleasure or consequences. Mm-hmm. It's about duties.
It's about what, excuse me?
It's about duties.
Okay.
What is the right thing?
Okay.
So to really see the distinction between utilitarian ethics and Kantian ethics, I'll give you an example. Say you're at home, Fareed, and somebody knocks on your door, you open the door, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and the person has a large knife, and they're crazy, and they ask you, is your neighbor home? Okay. Right? A utilitarian would say, well, we want to maximize pleasure, so in this case, it's okay to lie to him and say your neighbor's not home.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
If the same person came 1 o'clock in the morning and he was a friend of your neighbor and he just had some roses and some chocolates and said, is your neighbor home? Utilitarian would say, yeah, tell him he's home. You know?
Right.
So it's about pleasure.
Right.
It's about concept. Kantian ethics of Immanuel Kant, they're based on duties, which means you categorically have to do the right thing regardless of the consequences. Okay. You can never lie, never cheat, never do anything like that. It's about, because your duty is to do those things. So if somebody comes to your house and with a knife at 1 o'clock in the morning and they're crazy and they say, is your neighbor home? A Kantian ethicist has to say, yes. They can't lie. Under no circumstances they can lie. Because if they lie, they're denying the other person agency to make their own decisions. So with the Kantian ethics is very categorical. You can never lie, you never do these bad things. Utilitarians are, the trolley thought experiment that's very famous. So you have this lever and you have the train that's going.
Yeah.
So that's utilitarianism.
Wait. So under utilitarianism, you would actually you would flip the switch and kill a smaller number of people, and
Yeah.
under what was it, Kantian?
Kantian ethics, you would just do the right thing.
And the right thing here would be what exactly? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that I'm not sure about.
Okay.
I'm not sure what a Kantian ethicist would say about that. The thing about Kantian ethics is that it's really not it's not that popular. Utilitarianism is quite popular. This is why Sam Harris is a utilitarian.
Right.
Alex is a utilitarian, and others are.
Okay.
Virtue ethics, which is Aristotle's idea, that's just an ancient idea. I mean,
Okay.
I don't think many people would call themselves. Well, they may be actually. I think they are.
Okay.
Well, there are people who speak about Aristotle's view and they elaborate on it. I'm not sure if they subscribe to it. But, Aristotle's idea was about virtue and how you as a person and developing these virtuous characteristics and whatnot. But anyway, I wanted to reiterate throughout the debate, it doesn't matter how sophisticated your ethical system is, whether you're a Kantian ethicist, a utilitarian ethicist, virtue ethicist, it's all arbitrary, it's all illusory, because the base foundation of morality is evolved, and we could have evolved in a different way.
Right.
So one of the examples I gave is we could have evolved to have 6 fingers rather than 5.
Right.
That's arbitrary. And according to Richard Dawkins, and nobody can deny this, no evolutionary biologist who doesn't believe in God can deny this, rape, pillaging, murder is as arbitrary as the fact that we have 5 fingers rather than 6.
Right. Understood.
And that, when I used that against Alex, he didn't really have an answer. In fact, I brought it up 3 times. Sorry, it came up 3 times in the debate, that particular quotation of Richard Dawkins, because it's quite sickening when you hear that. Somebody going around the world like Dawkins speaking about religion being bad and evil, and he himself admitting that rape is as arbitrary as the fact that we have 5 fingers rather than 6.
Right.
He couldn't deny that.
Ajib.
Someone forced him to say that, by the way. Forced him not by making him misspeak, but they cornered him when they were having this discussion and then said, well, ultimately, this is what your view is. And he had to concede to that.
When you make a value judgment, don't you immediately step yourself outside of this evolutionary process and say there is the reason this is good is because it's good, and you don't have any way to stand on that statement?
But my value judgment itself could come from my evolutionary past, and I suppose...
So therefore, it's just as random in a sense as any product of evolution.
Well, you could say that, but it doesn't. In any case, nothing about it makes it more probable that there is anything supernatural.
Okay, but ultimately, your belief that rape is wrong is as arbitrary as the fact that we've evolved 5 fingers rather than 6. I mean,
you could say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was very important, like I mentioned before, when you asked me, Fareed, that how do you turn the tables against atheists? You really need to understand their worldview better than them. I recently had a debate with an atheist, and he was so rubbish. I actually sent him a book, and I said, read this book and we'll speak again. Because I'm trying to educate them, right? They don't really know what atheism is. They don't really understand their worldview. And I was especially surprised that...
Is that the case with most of them?
Militant ones, yes. Because an atheist that is truly an atheist that believes in the consequences of atheism, they're not going to go around preaching atheism. Trust me.
Okay.
Because if your worldview is truly that grim, and atheism is grim, life is meaningless, life is pointless.
Right.
The last thing you would do is go around wasting your time on religious bigots and trying to change their view. You just go out womanizing, drinking, fornicating. That's what you do. You just enjoy life.
Right.
You spend your time reading these books and theology and stuff like this. So an atheist that's an apologist, an atheist that's evangelical, they don't really understand atheism.
Right. Understood. So I'm just curious, what are you reading these days, and what are you planning to do next?
Okay, that's a good question. I sort of read in a very weird way. So I download, say, papers from evolutionary, just different things to do with evolution. And then I would like read the abstract and then read certain parts of it, which I find interesting, with certain books. In fact, let me just look at what I've been downloading recently. Recently, I downloaded Douglas Murray's book, The Strange Death of Europe, which seems like a bit of an odd book to be reading if you're tackling atheism, but it's not, because Douglas Murray is an atheist. However, he understands that a lot of the Western world is shaped by Christianity. Even he argues in his book that human rights, even the concept of human rights, is a Christian dream, right? And and all these types of things.
Right.
And also, I've recently been reading some stuff of this Yuval Noah Harari. I'm sure you've heard of this, right? So his recent book, obviously Sapiens is an old book, but 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. That's a book of his in which he's arguing about the future of humanity, and he has all these different ideas and stuff. So I try and make myself more well-read, inshallah, than any atheist I come across,
Inshallah.
right, in atheism. And there's a plus side to it and a negative side to it. The plus side of it is I have an edge over them. The negative side of it is Muslims say to me, you need to break down your content, or we don't really understand fully what you're saying, or things of this effect, right? Or also the curse of knowledge. Like, for example, I may use terms like philosophical naturalism without defining them and stuff like this. So that's a bit of a downside, because I try and improve my stuff. I
think your short clips in general are quite easy to follow, to be honest.
Yeah, there is that. But even in this debate, the feedback I got a lot is that the beginning, or basically the feedback was the beginning was clear, the end was clear, the middle was very technical, right? And that's just one of the problems of that is that when two people are going back and forth in a debate and they both are speaking about technical issues which are going over people's heads, the average observer is going to look at that and say, oh, it's a stalemate. No one's really winning here.
Right.
And that's very problematic.
Right.
Because even with Hamza's debate with Krauss, there were some parts which were technical. So some may think, oh yeah, Krauss made a good point. Oh yeah, Hamza made a good point. But in reality, Krauss was taking a battering. So that's one of the problems of, and I'm trying to elevate the Muslims so that they, this is second nature for them. Yeah. So philosophical naturalism, methodological naturalism, or moral nihilism, all these ideas, you just make them more and more familiar. You just make Muslims more and more familiar, so that, because when we want to have discussions with atheists, one of the things that I love to do is with militant atheists, I love to just traumatize them with knowledge, So I just love to basically let them speak. And one of the tactics I was doing with Alex was letting him waffle and talk, and then just insert in there, what are you talking about? Because this person said this and this person said this. And that's one of the things which, if you watch the videos of Sheikh Ahmed Deedat, he would let his opponent say things, and then he'd be like, what on earth are you talking about? And then he'd educate them on that topic.
Right.
And he's been one of my big inspirations for tackling new atheism, because I see if he was alive and he was taking on new atheism, what would he do? And that's what I try and do.
Right. Rahimahullah.
There's no way I can meet even an inch of his status in Islam and his status in the dawah, but I just try and do that to the best of my ability.
Rahimahullah, ya akhi. May Allah give you that status. Allah barak feek. Ya akhi, thank you. Thank you for all this. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time. What do you have any like final words to young Muslims who are trying to get into this, who have doubts perhaps with atheism, and are looking into this, looking into Darwinism and whatnot?
So, look, this is one of the advices I gave you a few days back, that you need to tackle new atheism as well. You have all the skills to do it. You have the rhetoric as well. You need all these things, and it all comes together. But one thing which I would say is, obviously, I'm going to give a piece of advice for the du'at and a piece of advice for people that are like facing some issues and stuff. So in terms of facing issues, look, the first thing you should be doing is grounding yourself in Islam, not grounding yourself in the latest debates between Muhammad Hijab or Hamza or Abdullah Andalusi. That's the dumb thing to do, right? That's
no
Islam.
No doubt.
Your first basis for Islam to build up your own iman has to be the classical Islamic understanding. Yeah.
Right.
So the Surah, Quran, the tafsir of the Quran, it becomes a bit of a cliche, we need to study Aqidah. It doesn't matter if it's a cliche. Now, the thing is, when you're tackling new atheism, they come at the world with a certain perspective which we subconsciously accept. So they come into the argument with this view that, we're skeptics, we don't take anything for granted, and from scratch, we build up our worldview, right? And the Muslim says, well, I'll accept your premise, right? And I'll also prove to you Islam is true from scratch. Even from the belief that there is no God, I will then show that there is a God. But the problem is, just like with the Bible, we accepted that the Bible is true, and then we started debating. So we debated on handicapped.
Of course. We
will debate on a handicap if the first thing that we do is we accept the premises of skepticism.
No doubt.
Right? Our starting point is not that, there's not a God, let's try and see if there's a God and have a debate. Our starting point is not that. Our epistemology as Muslims is not skepticism.
Right.
We believe in Allah because of fitrah. It's natural. Skepticism, even if you don't bring in Islam, skepticism is inherently incoherent. Because if you say you're a skeptic, well, you should be skeptical about skepticism. And then you just go off into a hole, which is known as solipsism. I'm sure you've...
No, I haven't. No, that's new. That's new information.
Okay. No, I'm sure you know of solipsism, but you don't know the term solipsism. So solipsism is the idea that we don't know anything, we don't know any knowledge except our own experience. I don't know whether I really exist.
Okay.
Yeah, we all know.
Yes.
Yeah, this is solipsism, right? Skeptics, they magically step out of solipsism, right? And they start debating us. We have to kick them back into that hole, right? And say, if you're really a skeptic, you should never leave solipsism. Because really, and that's what I find amongst these atheists, is that with their own skepticism, with their own worldview, they're not really skeptical. When it comes to God, they put on the skepticism, what do you call it? The frequency of skepticism goes up like by 1,000,000%.
Right.
They're not really being skeptical, they're being selectively skeptical. Because if you're truly skeptical, then you should be like, well, I shouldn't say there is no God. I should just say, well, I don't know if I exist, and that's it, right? You can't really get past that.
Right.
So my advice would be, look, that's why we need to learn Islam, because if you don't learn Islam and you go off into their debate, then you start off on skepticism. Not only are you taking on their view to disprove their view is so incoherent, you couldn't get anywhere. So there's two problems here. The first problem is we accept their idea and then we try and debate them on that. The second view is we don't even recognize that their view is inherently inconsistent. It doesn't actually work. The second thing, so that's the advice for Muslims, that for Muslims, that they need to ground their worldview. Okay. The other thing is that we believe as Muslims there's a large role to play in our iman in spirituality. Spirituality is not something which is amplified through reason alone, right? It's not the case that somebody gives you a rational argument for Islam, some formula, and then your iman hits the sky. Yeah.
Right.
Iman is classically understood that your iman increases with good deeds and decreases with bad deeds.
Yes.
Iman is a spiritual thing, and that spirituality is the foundation of our worldview, right? It's not the case that, you know, we believe in Allah because, or we believe in Islam only because it's rational. Yeah. Look at Iblis. Yeah. Iblis, does he not have rational arguments for God? Yes, he does, because he's seen God. What greater rational argument than you need than you've empirically seen God, right? Not in that sense he's seen God, but in the sense he's, you know, he conversed with God, right? So Iblis, in that way, he knows God exists. Mm-hmm. Does Iblis not know rationally that God exists? Yes, he does. Does he not know rationally that the Prophet ﷺ is a prophet? Yes, he does. Right. Does Iblis have iman? Is he a believer? No, he's a kafir. Mm-hmm. But he has all the rational tools. Right. So rationality alone does not mean you have faith.
Right.
And that's why I find some of the Muslims, they've really become like Mutazilites. Yeah. They're like, well, you can't really believe in Allah unless you have rational evidence. And it's like, what on earth are you talking about? What on earth are you talking about? If there's somebody who's a Bedouin who lives out in the desert and all his life he's never heard the cosmological argument, Kalam argument, or whatever,
right.
He believes in Allah is fitri, and he worships Allah and all of this, you're telling me his iman is incomplete because he doesn't know this philosophy stuff? That's total rubbish. In fact, there's a beautiful story about Imam Razi. That Imam Razi, as you know, he was a great philosopher. He was a great orator. He had like 1,000 arguments for God. And once he was passing through this town or village or whatever, and he was with all his students, and this woman saw him, and this woman said, you know, who is this man? And, you know, his students were like, this is Imam Razi. You know, he has 1,000 arguments for God's existence. And the woman said, well, if he didn't have 1,000 doubts, he wouldn't have 1,000 arguments. And then the story goes that when Imam Razi was passing away, he said, I am dying upon the iman of that old woman.
Okay, she's from Nizapur, I'm guessing.
Sorry?
She's from Nizapur, I'm guessing.
Who's that? I don't know who that is.
Nizapur is the city. I'm assuming there's this common stereotype of the old women of Nizapur. They're like simple
maybe, but you know, the old woman. It's a very famous story.
Right.
And you know, people say to me like, "Oh, are you saying Islam's irrational?" No, I'm not saying Islam's irrational. I'm just making an obvious observance, which you can make even if you're not Muslim, which is, we as human beings, many of our actions, it's not just rationality, they are values and beliefs which our worldviews are grounded upon. But those things are not only grounded in rationality. So for example, if you take an average atheist who believes in right and wrong, they're an average atheist, they're not a philosopher, they're not into debating and stuff.
Yeah.
But if you ask them for a rational justification for morality, no one can give it.
Right.
No one can give a rational proof for morality.
Right.
Yet, we all believe in it. We all believe certain things are right, certain things are wrong. There's no rational proof that the universe has purpose or our life has purpose. But people believe it. Right? So the way I see it is, at the time of the Sahaba, the Taghut were Lat, Uzza, Manat, right?
Yes.
Today, the new Lat is Aql, is rationality. We've elevated rationality to this God.
I thought you were going to say Dawkins and Sam Harris. That was my assumption.
Yeah, that is true, but generally we've taken reason to
Yeah.
be this demigod,
Right.
right? And that's obviously Allah says in the Quran, the worst of creation are those who don't reason. Yeah. And Allah again and again tells us reason and think, reflect.
Right.
Of course. However, Muslims have taken it to an extreme. Some Muslims have taken it to an extreme as a reaction to the atheists who've taken it to an extreme.
Right.
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 Just to try to show we're rational too, so we're going to accept your skeptical assumptions.
Right.
You see,
I understand.
we have a long-winded answer to your question about people dealing with doubts, but that was why I wanted to say that. Start with Islam. Don't start with skepticism.
Allah barak feek. Similar, yani, somewhat related. Well, I guess more related to one of the earlier questions I mentioned. If someone is having a conversation, a debate between a Muslim and an atheist, let's say this atheist is being a bit aggressive, he's not discussing morality. The discussion is not something about the Prophet, peace be upon him, or the Quran, nothing that has to do with a moral question, but rather it has to do with the proofs of the prophethood, peace be upon him, for example, or the preservation of the Quran, for example. Would you, because the issue is, how long does one entertain that? Because a lot of that stuff can just carry on for a long amount of time without the Muslim going on the offensive. Would you turn the tables around and flip the topic to the existence of God, for example, or how would you manage something like that? You briefly spoke about atheists, like a true atheist who understands what nihilism leads to. That person wouldn't even bother. But we're not talking about this level of atheist. We're talking about the average atheist troll online, for example.
Okay, so look, I always bring my conversations back to God.
Yeah.
Because Allah is, when you come to believe in Allah, when you come to believe in God, that colors your entire understanding of evidence. Okay. Everything you see in a different perspective. So, for example, if an atheist says, how could you believe this man went to, from Makkah, went to Jerusalem, and then to heaven, and then back? How is this possible physically?
Right.
And then,
right.
What? I'll say to him, well, do you believe in God? And he'll be like, well, how's that related? I'll say, well, firstly, let's begin with this. Now, if you believe in God, then anything is possible. Because for God to grow a plant, God just grows a plant. A plant naturally grows. Or for God to send the Prophet ﷺ to paradise and back or whatever, for God is just as easy as growing a plant. It's nothing. It's just rearrangement of matter. Allah can do whatever He wants. Kun fayakun. So when you believe in God, everything becomes possible. Because you have to remember that if somebody, I'm going back to the time when I was at university, right? So, obviously being a young Muslim at university and even before that, there's times where, especially coming from like most Pakistanis do, they come from a background of cultural Islam, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not properly taught, it's just cultural Islam.
Right.
I could never accept the idea that there is no God. That made absolutely no sense to me. I was not willing to entertain that. That was so dumb.
Right.
But I was thinking about, well, is Islam true? Is it just that I'm Muslim because my parents are Muslim? What if Islam is false? These things were real possibilities for me. Right? That's why I was very confused. So I can understand somebody asking a question about, well, how can a man be a prophet? How can this be? How can that? But those things don't make any sense unless you go back to the very first thing, which is, do you believe in God? So when people ask me, what is the ultimate proof of Islam? I don't say to them it's the linguistic miracle or that miracle or that miracle. I say the proof of Islam primarily is that Islam is based upon Tawheed. It's based upon pure monotheism. Person say, what kind of proof is that? I don't believe in God. And it's like, oh, well, let me tell you why you should believe in God. Because if you do believe in God, and there is one all-powerful creator, automatically Islam is not true, but Islam is the best candidate. And then we can talk about other proofs. Because automatically, when you look at all other religions, they don't teach that God is unseen and unlike a human being and the only one worthy of worship. Every single religion has, when it comes to the worship of Allah, it has, other, deities or other things, and also, asma wa sifat, being different with creation. Right. That's the ultimate proof of Islam. Now, that's why it's important to always bring back the conversation to God. Even, and some people don't like this approach, although I don't see why it's problematic. When I come across an average atheist, and I've done this before, and I'm speaking to them, and I'm speaking about God, and they say, what about evolution? Didn't we come from chimpanzees and this and this and this? I don't challenge evolution. I don't challenge Darwinism.
Even though you could easily.
I could, but that would be irrelevant.
Right.
I simply say, well, do you believe in God? They're like, no, I don't believe in God because of evolution. I say, well, why would you think evolution undermines God? Even if human chimpanzees is true, even if the tree of life is true, why would you think it undermines God? And I've done this before. I've had conversations with atheists where I've said, okay, for the sake of argument, fine, you believe in human chimpanzees, you believe in tree of life. Why do you deny God? Now, some people think, no, you have to clarify why. No, you don't. Because if a person comes to believe in God, then you show them the Quran is true. Even after they believe in God and they believe in the Quran is true, they may still hold on to some evolutionary ideas. Who cares? Eventually, they will realize the ultimate truth is the Quran.
Right.
And when the ultimate truth is the Quran, then it doesn't matter what anybody else in the world seems to think about what the origin of life is, of how life evolved or whatever. You know deep down inside, no matter what happened, Allah did it. Whatever happened. Right. And then over time, as your faith increases more and more, you start to realize, okay, well, science is dhanni anyway. Science changes anyway. But it's not necessary. It's not necessary. And a lot of people are mistaken about this in the dawah. They think for somebody to accept Islam, they have to understand the wisdom of hijab. They have to understand why Darwinism is wrong. They have to understand why in Islam we have harsh penal codes, and they have to understand all these things. And no, somebody may accept Islam and they still have these remnants. They may still have feministic ideas. Yeah? Right. Eventually, when Iman grows upon them. Now, somebody may say, what's your dalil? Because everything in Islam is based upon dalil. I'll just point to the seerah. The Muslims who accepted Islam at the conquest of Makkah, they were, their Islam was quite, everybody knows this, Some of the Qurayshi leaders, when they accepted Islam, their acceptance of Islam was a bit reluctant. But eventually, and even some of them said that we accepted Islam, but then Islam grew upon us, right? Now look at Suhail ibn Amr, radiallahu anhu, right? Now, he accepted Islam, and then he was the cause, when the Prophet ﷺ died, to stabilize the rebellion in Makkah, when even the Makkans were thinking about rebelling, like the other cities and the other areas during the, when there was mass apostasies happening after the death of the Prophet. So, you can accept Islam but not have Iman. Iman grows on you. Allah makes the distinction in the Quran as well. Which is why also Sheikh Yasir Qadhi says that, in America, when he has people who are getting married to a Muslim woman, and just for the sake of the Muslim woman, they're taking the Shahada. From what I remember in me watching his video, he says that I just take the Shahada of that person at face value, because Islam is the truth and they'll grow upon it. Right. So I think, these things are very, very important. These nuances.
Habibi, Jazakallah khairan. I really, really appreciate this. Guys, subscribe to Darwinian Delusions. Follow Subboor on Twitter. And inshallah, we'll see you guys in the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.